right. Looks like we've got lots of people filing in and joining us here. So we'll just give them one more second to get all connected with audio and everything, and then we'll get going. All right, so it looks like our numbers have stabilized, so we might as well go ahead and get started since it is 7 o'clock. So welcome everybody. My name is Janine Higgins, and I am an engagement and education specialist with Alberta Environment and Parks. And I will be your facilitator for our information session this evening on competitive fishing events here in Alberta. So to start off, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that I am speaking to you tonight from the traditional territory of Treaty 6, being that we are coming together online from the traditional territories and homelands of many Indigenous peoples. I'd like to acknowledge all treaties in the province, as all of Alberta is treaty land and we are all treaty people. I'd like to acknowledge the long history and deep connections that First Nations and Métis have with this land, and I honor this today in hopes of working together in a good way. So for our session this evening, we are going to go through a couple of quick housekeeping items before I pass it over to Bill Patterson, who's going to be taking us through a presentation on competitive fishing here in Alberta. And then we'll be moving on to our question and answer section before we come to a close for this evening. So we did have our meeting scheduled to go until 8:30. We've got a fairly short presentation for you this evening, so we may not take all of the time that we need, but we are here to answer as many questions as needed once we move into that section. So for our question and answer session tonight, we are going to be using our Q&A tool. So if you're joining us on your computer, you should see this at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a cell phone, it might be along the top. But you can go ahead and open up that Q&A function and you'll be able to type your questions in there. And so once you open that up, you'll see a box pops up and you can type your questions in. And for this evening, we do have a smaller group of folks who are joining us, so we should be able to answer all of the questions that come in. But we can also use our upvoting tool as well. So if you see a question that somebody else has written in there that you really like to hear a response to, go ahead and hit that upvoting button, and that will help prioritize which questions we answer in which order. So a couple of rules for our Q&A, of course, is that, of course, anything inappropriate will be deleted. So keep it clean. I'm sure that won't be a problem for this evening. And if we've already answered questions and they're just continually coming up, we'll probably just dismiss them. We may also group questions together as well. So if we're seeing a lot of themes that have popped up, then we'll start to combine questions and make sure that we're providing a holistic response to those. And we're also going to be answering your pre-submitted questions as well. So when you registered, we had a couple of folks answer some pre-submitted questions. So a lot of them will be covered in the presentation itself that Bill's going to give, but we may also respond to some of those after the fact as well. So on our panel tonight, we've got a nice small group of us here. So as mentioned previously, we've got Bill Patterson, who's going to be our lead presenter. He's our fish allocation and use biologist. And then on the panel tonight, we have Shane Petrie, who is our fisheries policy manager, and Miles Brown, who is a senior fisheries biologist. And as already mentioned, my name is Janine, and I'll be your facilitator for this evening. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Bill to take us through the presentation.
So one click. Okay, we need to go back up one. There we go. Thanks, Janine.
No problem.
I hope you're all doing well tonight. Thank you for joining us. Competitive fishing in Alberta, and for that matter, Canada, has quite a long history and continues to be popular. A couple of photos there. One is from southern Alberta. The left one is on a reservoir, and the right one is an aerial photo of a winter competitive fishing event, or CFE, that took place on Pigeon Lake quite a few years ago now. Each one of those dots actually is an angler. You'll see the parking lot on the top of the photo, and then I think there's the station in the middle of that grid. So pretty impressive. In Alberta, what is a competitive fishing event? Currently, the definition of a competitive fishing event is very specific. I have it there on the slide there. I'll give you a few moments to read if you like. A few things about that current definition that stand out are It specifies that it's for rod and reel only. CFE, it specifies that the CFEs can run for any length of time. It specifies competitive events take place at one specified water body and have 26 or more participants. The current definition determines how we regulate them, which fishing events require a license and which events do not. Appreciating the definition sets the stage for tonight's info session as we discuss competitive fishing events and updates for the 2022 season. Why are competitive fishing events regulated? Reasons for licensing CFEs, if I may use that acronym, are above all around following Alberta's fish conservation and management strategy. Managing fish resources and fisheries and preserving species at risk fish populations, and monitoring the impact of these events on fish populations as angling results in the accidental mortality of fish. The key here is that Government Alberta has jurisdiction over management of fish resources and utilizes an allocation process that supports conservation. The 4 allocation priorities that direct us are, I'm just going to move my screen up a little bit here. We don't bother the presentation too much. That direct us are, the first allocation is to the fish themselves. The conservation of fish and preservation of species at risk. Fish population is fundamental. After all, without healthy fish populations, there are no fisheries. The second allocation is to Indigenous fisheries. These are constitutionally protected rights and are not negotiable. The third allocation is to recreational fisheries. These are managed through sport fishing regulations. And the fourth allocation is to economic or commercial use of fish. An example of this is competitive fishing. And as you know, they are managed through a licensing process. The goal of this allocation structure is to ensure sustainability of Alberta's fish resources. Basically, lower allocations cannot infringe on higher allocations. If it's determined an allocation is infringing, more restrictive rules or closures are utilized. Alberta has 2 categories and a few subcategories of fishing events currently: non-competitive events and competitive events. There are 3 subcategories for competitive fishing events. The non-competitive events are social in nature, have 26 or have fewer than 26 participants, do not require a license, though volunteer registration is recommended. Briefly, the competitive fishing events can be either small, the 26 to 75 participants, less than $1,000 in prizes, require a license, but they follow sport fishing regulations. Medium CFEs are 26 to 75 participants, prizes over $1,000. They require a license and follow a set of conditions of license. Large CFEs are 76 or more participants, prizes of any amount. They require a license too and follow a set of conditions of license too. However, following the current legal definition of competitive fishing event, licenses are only required for events that take place at a single specified water body. Why do we measure and want to understand the potential impacts of CFEs? To understand and account for the impact of fishing events on fish populations and possibly recreation, Indigenous, and conservation allocations, we require organizers of licensed events to submit a summary of fishing effort and catch. As these events have the possibility of generating considerable, let me get back there. Sorry, here we are. This is the correct slide. To understand and account for the impact of fishing events on our fish populations and possibly recreation, Indigenous, and conservation allocations, we require organizers of licensed events to submit a summary of fishing effort and catch. As these events have the possibility of generating considerable angling effort and large catches of fish in a short period of time, there is a possibility that mortality related to catching, handling, and releasing fish is sizable and may have an impact on takeaway opportunities from higher recreation allocations. Basically, all forms of mortality need to be accounted for when assessing and understanding the status of a fish population, considering the management objective and any potential management action. Considering all of this, we are updating the legal definition of a competitive fishing event. The trend of fishing events that are organized online and occur at multiple water bodies is a rather new trend across Canada. As we have discussed, unlicensed fishing competitions have no reporting requirement. This creates less certainty in the management and ensuring Alberta meets its allocation priorities. To help us with updating the CFE definition and updates to CFE guidelines, we conducted a jurisdictional review of our two neighboring provinces, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. We felt the review was very helpful as it provided a comparison of competitive fishing event policies and provided a few ideas for updates too. We believe these updates are enhancements as they simplify CFE policy and licensing. These updates do not reduce the opportunity to obtain a license to organize a CFE. This was simply an opportunity to simplify and modernize CFE licensing and guideline. As the current definition of CFE is very specific, we are working on simplifying it for 2022. The specific definition causes a regulatory loophole, that allows CFEs that are organized at more than one water body to be unlicensed. We found this loophole with the help of our legal department when we first began our review of CFE policy and the variety of CFEs occurring in Alberta. Our main goal during these updates was to simplify and streamline, modernize, if you like, licensing and CFE guidelines. The definition of a CFE for 2002 and on is greatly simplified. This change also provides opportunity to license other forms of fishing events. The new definition still allows the smaller social style of fishing events. These are derby style events, have less than 26 participants and do not require a license. I'll build this left side of the slide here first. That's our current fishing event structure. So this slide lists the updates we're making for 2022. We reduced the types of fishing events from 4 small, medium, large CFEs and social ones down to 2, derby and competitive. We've updated the forms from print and scan or mail to online fillable forms that automatically attach to emails. There'll be an application form for competitive fishing events, a notification form for derby fishing events, and a summary form for both competitive and derby fishing events. The summary form requires organizers to provide effort and catch data by water body. This data per water body includes number of anglers, number of days fished, numbers fished by species, caught, handled, released. Effort and catch data by water body helps us quantify mortality. And it may be more work, but will contribute to the sustainability of those fish populations. The update also includes an option to pay online. We're working on more consistent conditions of license. Though ideal, we understand conditions cannot be 100% consistent from CFE to CFE across Alberta because of varying management objectives, weather, water conditions, water bodies themselves, species, etc. However, we'll strive to make them less variable. We'll also have an explicit rules for ineligible water bodies and species at risk and fish species. These will help organizers of both competitive and derby events with selecting water bodies and focal species, so events do not impact higher risk populations or species at risk fish. This is a timeline that briefly depicts the work items during the CFE guideline review. The new CFE guideline will commence April 1st, 2022. To be clear, regardless of when you apply, whether it's February or April, coming up, all competitive fishing events planned for 2022 open water season and beyond will follow these new guidelines. Organizers will require a CFE license whether your event is on one water body or several water bodies. Derby events are required to submit a notification form, and summary forms will be required for both competitive and Derby events. So a summary, that's how brief the presentation was, summary of these changes to the competitive fishing event guideline. So we've simplified the legal definition of a CFA, so all competitive fishing events require a license. We reduced the types of events down to 2, competitive and Derby. Online fillable forms, application form for competitive events, notification form for Derby events, summary form for both events, online payment, and explicit rules for ineligible water bodies and species at risk. So thanks for listening. Hope you found that informative, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. I'll pass it back to Janine now.
Great, thanks, Bill. So we are going to move into our question and answer section of the evening. So like we said, it's quite a short presentation for you tonight. Hopefully you're able to catch everything that Bill put in there. And so I see we've got one question that's come in already from Ron, which is great. So again, feel free to open up that Q&A tool and start typing in your questions. And we're going to start off with a couple of the pre-submitted questions just to give folks some time to type their questions in. So our first question that was pre-submitted comes from Ken, and Ken is saying, if the government feels that the walleye are in a critical state of low population, then why not put out more game wardens?
I can take a swing at that, Jeannie. Thank you, Ken, for submitting your question. And again, just for folks that are out there that I haven't met, my name is Miles, and I'm a senior fish bio here in Slave Lake. And so I appreciate that that you asked the question. I think our peers in Fish and Wildlife and Enforcement Services would also agree that some districts would certainly benefit from having more officers. I think we support our enforcement colleagues as much as we can from our seat in Environment and Parks. Ultimately within our role, we certainly unfortunately don't have the ability to enhance the staffing structure in Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Services. But if that is a priority, I think what is important is to talk to your local MLA to notify both the Department of AEP and Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Services and say we would like to see more enforcement officers out in the land base to support our fish populations and ultimately all of our fish and wildlife resources.
Great, thank you. We have another pre-submitted question from Kevin here, and then I think we'll go into the live questions because I see we have a few coming in from Jim as well. So the other question from Kevin is just wondering, are there steps to shorten the process for CPR events? And if you maybe want to tell us what a CPR event is as well, that'd be great.
Again, I can take a swing at this, Janine, and obviously any of my fellow panelists here jump in if I miss anything. So CPR in this instance, catch, photo, release style events. And so as Bill's outlined, departmentally, we're looking to make some changes to the whole of the CFE management process here. And so I think for both types of events, whether that's CPR, catch, photo, release, or the more traditional weigh-in style formats, the process will be largely the same. The trade-offs, the things that we see different between those two things are really things like, the duration of transport of fish and nuance within the tournament that might have implications on fish mortality or the duration of the event or the size of the event. But overall, the process between the two types should be pretty well consistent. And as Bill identified, really where the breakpoints would come in is between things that are the tournament style or derby, depending on which size of event and what criteria is there. But they should be the same so that there isn't maybe a more favorable approach to one versus the other. But then at the water body level, if there's nuance and a need to manage species more particularly, if that's walleye at a low density or pike or something like that, it allows us to point to those trade-offs between the types and say, yeah, well, this style of event may suit better the management objectives of the water body.
Great, thanks, Miles. So we have just one more pre-submitted question and then we'll go live. So this one comes from Brian, and Brian is saying, why are there no rules for depth restriction, barbless hooks, time or rule enforcement by marshal on multiple lake CFEs?
I can respond to that, Janine. So obviously there are going to be, that's the plan. I mean, the main idea of the presentation and bringing folks together tonight is to give you an update on the review that we've undertaken and the results of that. And obviously the key result is that we're proposing, we're going to change the definition of a competitive fishing event so that all events would require a license greater than 26 participants. And they will have associated rules just like any other competitive fishing event.
Okay, great. So looking at some of our live questions, we have one from Ron, and Ron is saying, is there a link for the fillable CFE form?
I can do that one, Janine.
Okay.
Yes, there will be a link for the fillable forms. The Mawile Alberta webpage for competitive fishing events will be updated to include all this information and have links for these forms.
And when do we expect that to happen, Bill?
We will be working on that and hopefully have it up January, early February at the earliest or at the latest.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, next question comes from Jim saying, is this new CFE fee the same as it was prior, $25?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Right now, we haven't planned a change as part of our review, so it is still $25. Although in the next fiscal year, there is our 5-year fish and wildlife license fee review that'll be undertaken. So if something changes after that, we'll let people know then. But right now, as part of our review, we didn't make any or propose any changes to the costs. And I think, I'll jump into also in terms of the timeline, and I think Miles kind of spoke to this earlier when we were talking about would there be a shorter timeline for catch photograph release events, and I think you can expect that the timeline it's probably going to be somewhat more efficient in the sense that you'll be able to fill forms online, email them, pay online. We won't have to wait for snail mail in terms of sending in checks or things like that. So there'll be some efficiencies there, but the review period will depend upon, of course, the completeness of information and that sort of thing. So I don't expect it to be too much change from previous outside of the digital enhancements, let's say.
Okay, and so in terms of the expected timeline for turnaround from the time that the application is submitted to when people receive a CFE is dependent on the water body?
It's dependent on review. It's dependent on the completeness of the application. It's depending on what they're applying, when they're applying for. So it is independent. I don't think generally it's taken us too long to review. I haven't run into too many instances. In fact, I think we've been on the very short side in terms of, sometimes within a couple of weeks. We try to target as quickly as we can, but oftentimes there's either discussion or more information, and that takes the time it takes.
Okay, great, thank you.
And maybe just something to add on to that, and Shane touched on it. There's, CFEs. Obviously, Bill mentioned we have an allocation priority within the province, and we're looking at conservation. We're looking at Indigenous fisheries, recreational, and then sometimes on certain water bodies, Lesser Slave is a good example. We could get multiple CFE requests coming in for different parts of the season. As we're completing assessments on certain water bodies as well, independent of the event, we can see changes in fish populations, we can see changes in fish management objectives, the necessity for recovery actions, or in some positive cases, improvement in fisheries. So those gears are turning in the background as well while we're reviewing the tournament. So there can be a great package, very complete things can come in. And then we're taking that into a broader context, which is, the management of the water body. And so if we're seeing challenges or changes there, that can influence it. And we do our best to stay in contact with tournament organizers, folks that are submitting those applications. And fortunately, we've grown the number of online resources that we have. So we have status assessment reports that people can find online, and these other pieces that sort of connect that fulsome story together. But yeah, as a component to it. So when we say review, it's not just a black box. It is taking the event in context of management at the water body level.
Great, thanks, Miles. All right, so our next question comes from Ron, and keep the questions coming, folks. If you've got more, just go ahead and type them on in there. In the past, you have given CFE license events a 5% mortality rate even before the event has started. With this new policy, are we starting at 0?
I can speak to that. I don't think the policy affects the assessment of mortality from angling or from undertaking a competitive fishing event. The policy is really around regulating the sport, the industry. It's about making sure that we have sustainable fisheries. It's about considering all the things that Miles just spoke about in terms of allocation, in terms of Indigenous use, in terms of conservation. So we wouldn't be changing. We wouldn't. The policy review has nothing to do with the assessment of mortality. The type of CFE, although, could obviously have an effect on the assessment of mortality. So if you're proposing a catch photograph release, we would maybe look at the lower end of that, depending on airtime and things like that. But if you're looking at putting 2 or 3 fish in a live well and trucking them across the lake to a weigh boat or something like that, obviously that's something different, and we would assess mortality accordingly. So no, the policy doesn't really reset, or if you will, or to 0 in terms of mortality assessments.
Great, thanks, Shane. Next question here says, in the past, we had talked about giving CFE a 2-year license so that we can advertise early in the year. Is this going to happen?
I can jump into that. So I'm not sure I recall the 2-year license. Maybe that predates me or something, or maybe that was in a specific part of the province. But I don't know. It's something I guess we could consider. Although typically, I think if it's an advertising related thing, we can do other things that would allow advertising in lieu of that. I mean, even in this year, as we approach making some of the changes that we plan to make for April 1st, if you apply in March or February, typically we start seeing applications in February, let's say, so that there's appropriate time for advertising for even May or June events. We'll make sure there are some processes in place that allow that to happen, so that we don't, even if we haven't issued the license, because the new process starts April 1 and that's when the legislation actually kicks in. We'll make sure that we pursue some things to make sure that we can allow advertising to occur far in advance of that as needed.
Great. Bill, was there anything you wanted to add there?
Well, I was gonna say that that's an interesting thought, but considering the potential change in status of a fish population, that we might be hesitant to offer that 2-year window.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that would be very specific. If you were in a water body that had a liberal objective for the species that you were fishing for, there could be opportunity there. If you're in a water body that has a sustainable objective and other harvest objectives for recreational fishing, Indigenous use, those kinds of things, then it would be a little bit more challenging, certainly. So it's something that could be considered, but would be very lake by lake specific, I think. Yeah. And then can you apply for a CFE in December? You can, sure. You can apply anytime you want. But
You're taking my job, Shane.
sorry, I'm jumping ahead. But yeah, you can apply. We will look at it in the context of the new rules, and I guess you can have a conversation with the local biologist to see if what your needs are for advertising, what you're thinking there, or when that CFE was to take place, and we could go manage it accordingly in terms of the review and allowing time for advertising.
Just a note to bring into this conversation as well. Something Shane there had said, and Bill, in terms of what, the lake specific or water body specific nature of some of our assessments in the review. Again, if we take CFEs into the context of our whole management system as well, fisheries issues a number of licenses. There's a recreational fishing license, an indigenous fishing license, research licenses. It's uncommon for many of those to bridge multiple years for various reasons. Some of them legislative, some of them condition-based. So, the hesitation or the concept of looking at a CFE license within sort of the whole family of licenses that fisheries issues is something I think we would do as well. If we were asked a question then by a recreational angler going, well, if I understand the allocation priority and it is sort of a tiered approach, then why are we issuing a multi-year license for one group but not multi-year licenses for other things? So it is a good question and one that can be looked into, but again, because we manage these different dimensions of fisheries for different uses, I think we also have to be sort of aware and respectful of those things. So yeah, just as an additional comment, because again, it's CFEs is what we're here to talk about today, but they don't operate in isolation to all the other things sort of in fisheries.
Okay, great. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come in. So if folks do have any more questions, please feel free to type them in to the Q&A tool. But otherwise, maybe I'll pass it over to Shane, who can give some closing words before we go through some closing slides. But yeah, keep your questions coming if you've got any more, because like we said, we knew it would be a fairly short meeting tonight, but we're here to answer any other questions you may have.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Yeah, I think we knew going in this was going to be a short session. I did want to make sure, though, we had been talking about undertaking a review for some time of competitive fishing, both the definition and the process. And I think that really, this is really just an update. It's to, we sent invitations out to those folks, to a number of folks that have held licenses previously, and we thought we'd just come and update folks on what the outcomes are. And I think the key takeaways are that, we're looking to change the definition. We view that as a regulatory loophole and issue and something that really creates uncertainty in terms of the management of our fisheries. And so that's the key. I think the other things to remember are that we're definitely taking steps to improve the process. We're going to put a lot of stuff online. We're going to modernize it. I mean, you're going to be able to have payments online. We're going to actually step into the 20th century anyway, and have those processes in fillable forms, and then you can email those, and we'll have contact lists and things like that. I mean, some of it we're still building as we go, but hopefully this makes things clearer and simpler, I think, ultimately in the long run. Lastly, I guess I also want to acknowledge, folks that are in the competitive fishing industry. I mean, many of you who run events and things like that, I think in recent years, we've definitely seen, and I've seen a shift in thinking, and I think there's some credit due out there for folks that have taken those steps really proactively to, support, your industry and perhaps the next stage of competitive fishing in terms of, looking at, taking suggestions, having conversations about things that are less impacting, fewer pre-fishing days, moving to catch, photograph, release. And I think all those things matter. And so that's one thing I just, hand out a kudos to those folks that are really looking forward and forward looking for the industry, so that, it really does make a difference. And so it's something that we should also acknowledge. So well done.
Great, thanks, Shane. And we do have 2 more questions that came in. So we'll go to Jim's question first here. Will you provide a copy of the recorded meeting to everyone in attendance?
I can answer that, Janine. Yes, we can. The info session is being recorded. Our panelists are comfortable with that idea. It's good to have that information. You can revisit it. So yes, we'll do that.
Great, thanks, Bill. And we have another question here from Brian saying, can I apply for a CFE on a lake that is closed for harvest for walleye?
I can take that. The short answer to that is no. You will not be able, they will not be eligible. There will have to be some harvest regulation on there to apply for a CFE. It's no different than would have been what that part of the process than would have been previously.
Yeah, other than the zero limit SHL lakes, those aren't allowed either.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, so those wouldn't have changed. Now, there are a number of, so that part of it has not changed.
Okay, sounds good. So looks like we don't have any more questions here. So I'll just take us through a quick few closing slides. And then again, if there's any more questions that come in, we'll address them here. But as Bill did mention, we are going to be posting information up on our My Wild Alberta webpage. So we've got essentially our Facebook page, which is a really great place to follow if you have Facebook, because we do share lots of information on there. It's sort of the best way to keep up to date with us in terms of what our staff are up to and any important updates, and also public engagements as well. So opportunities to be able to provide your feedback through upcoming engagements and things like that. So we've also got more information on both alberta.ca and My Wild Alberta. So of course, Google is your best friend when it comes to that. And once this session closes, you are going to be redirected automatically to a webinar survey. So if you can provide us with feedback on tonight's session, that would be greatly appreciated. Hopefully you've been in a session like this with us before, but we do them quite regularly now. So we're always looking for ways to be able to improve the process. And going forward, if you have any other follow-up questions that you'd like to chat with some of our experts on, you can reach out to Bill directly. We also used our outreach services email as well to contact you all to be able to invite you to this event. So you can send an email there and we'll make sure that it gets to the right person as well. Or you can send an email to Bill directly and we'll follow up. So as Bill mentioned in the timeline, you can expect to see new forums and things like that coming out in January or February. And we'll be sure to share that information whenever that is posted up on My Wild Alberta. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'll just double check and make sure, but it doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come in. So thanks folks so much for joining us this evening. We know it was a quick session tonight, but we really appreciate you giving up your time and spending a bit of your evening with us to talk a little bit more about competitive fishing events.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.